Are you ready? Last night was good. Tonight will be better. We had a great time last night, Thursday night, opening up our disputed national championship marathon right here at the Voice of College Football, running through the playoff era of 2014 through 2022. Tonight, we go through the BCS era with all of you. Appreciate you all being here. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. We have left the link to the call-in in the chat as well. I actually, for a second consecutive night, you will be happy and proud of me. I've also left the link in the description section of the video so you can call in using that link. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Best discussion, debate, and analysis of the game we all love each and every day with you right here. Amazon link. Before we do anything, Amazon link. Please register that between your ears. Put it somewhere where you will not forget it. And every time you go shopping, use the Amazon link, and you will make me happy. You will make yourself happy because the content will be secure here at the Voice of College Football for months and months and years and years and years to come. So again, the Amazon link's in the description section of all the videos. If you do anything for us tonight, please grab the Amazon link, put it somewhere where you will remember it, use it. It's the same shopping experience, and you help contribute to the Voice of College Football. We're going to do the same setup tonight that we did last night, which means we're going to go through all the years during the BCS era. We're going to review every year, and we are going to deliver a revised list of national champions. Some national champions are secure. Others will lose their national championship because they did not earn it against the field. Others will be added to the national championship list. Expect that list to be fairly lengthy. During much of this time, many teams that earned a spot in a BCS championship game just as much as other teams were denied that opportunity. Was the BCS formula that bad? Not necessarily was the formula that bad, but awarding just two teams an opportunity to play in a championship game was not enough. Just to review 2014 through 22, we did not strip any national championships. All of those teams that earned a playoff spot or were selected, let's look at it the more objective way. They didn't necessarily earn the position in the college football playoff. It was an invitational, continues to be an invitational. And in 2024 and beyond, as a 12-team playoff, will continue to be mostly an invitational, as the conference champions will be the only spots that will be rightfully earned. The rest of it, an invitation. Still, all of those teams were legitimate selections. And then the teams that won the two games to win national championships, they earned their national championship. However, we did have a number of issues with some of the teams, not necessarily the ones that were selected, more so that there were other teams that could have been selected that had resumes just as good as the teams selected. So the teams in 2014 that have a gripe, that have an argument, of course, the co-Big 12 champions, Baylor and TCU. In 2015, if we go to that best team, if we go to a resume solely, Ohio State didn't earn a playoff spot. Michigan State earned the playoff spot. But later, the college football playoff folks then started to use the term, we are selecting the best teams. And if there is a best team in 2015 that was left out of the playoff, that was better than one or two of the teams at least that made the playoff, then and that had the resume in terms of wins and losses, not the championship in the conference, but in terms of wins and losses to back it up, well, that team's 2015 Ohio State. The Big Ten champion of 2016, of course, Penn State won the head-to-head against Ohio State, also won the Big Ten, but did not get an invite to the playoff. They've got an argument in 2016. The teams in 2017 and in 2018 were a Big Ten championship Ohio State team from each of those seasons that had the egregious loss, but went 11-2 with the Big Ten championship and 12-1 with the Big Ten championship. And of course, UCF with the 25 consecutive wins. And then in 2018 or 2017, of course, they backed it up in the Peach Bowl against Auburn, the team that defeated the two teams that played in the national championship game. So Ohio State, certainly no claim for we're not claiming that these teams should have any justification to claim a championship, but they could have been selected to the playoff. Then who knows what would have happened. The UCF team, however, you can claim a national championship for 2017. 2018, you did not complete the run. You lost to LSU in the Fiesta Bowl. In 2019, again, if we're going to go with that Ohio State argument of 2015, we've got to apply that to Alabama in 2019 to a certain extent. This is where it gets a bit gray. The resume includes 2 losses to Oklahoma's 1. Therefore, I'm not saying that Alabama earned the playoff spot. They did not. However, better team status could be given to Alabama. Just like in 2020, you've got a situation with Cincinnati, Texas A&M, Oklahoma. The Bearcats were undefeated. That was good enough the next year, but they did not have that opportunity, that game opportunity matchup like they did against Notre Dame in 21. Texas A&M was 8-1. They had 1 loss in the best conference in America versus Notre Dame's 1 loss as the first team that lost a conference championship. How ironic. The ACC, weak ACC, allows Notre Dame to play in its conference 1 time, and they lose the conference championship game and still get a playoff spot. Oklahoma, we include, despite the 2 losses, they won a Big 12 championship. Again, they had an argument. 2021, really no one there, even though most people would say the likes of Baylor and Ohio State might have been a better team than Cincinnati. Cincinnati earned it with the 13-0 record in 2021, 2022. I believe the committee made the best selections there. Really, no one's got much of a debate, but again, best teams in the best conference, that would go to Alabama and Tennessee in regards to the teams that were left out. But these are the teams that I believe, based on a resume, have an argument for being left out. All right, that's all review from Thursday night. If you missed the show, check it out. We had a lot of great calls, comments, and questions come in. We're going to lay out the same formula tonight. So what we are doing is I'm going to review each season. And if you'd like to leave a super chat, comment, or question, certainly those will be recognized, and I will answer those to my best. And then we will take your calls as well. All right. Let's get to 2013. And of course, in 2013, we had Florida State winning a national championship. They were undefeated. So no question there. Florida State, national champion, although they certainly had a close call in the BCS championship game against Auburn. And they certainly did not play a tough schedule. Florida State played one of the weakest schedules of a national champion ever in 2013, but undefeated, 14-0. Let's see, 12-0 regular season, 14-0 Florida State, national champion in 2013. However, our controversy comes in 2013 with the selection of who played Florida State. And the BCS formula spit out Auburn. Auburn, of course, one of the most fortunate teams in college football. That particular season, they finished at, they were 12-1, as we will post the BCS rankings going into postseason play here. There it is. So you will recall that Auburn had the miracle play against Bama, of course, the kick 6. They also had a miracle play on the deflection to beat Georgia. And so, hey, all is fair. The bounces went their way. They made the plays. they defeated Missouri. And what was pretty spectacular about that Auburn team is that they, I believe, led the nation in rushing, even over the academy teams. They were that dominant on the ground with Nick Marshall at quarterback, Trey Mason at running back, and they were dominant offensively on the ground. And Auburn was selected by the BCS after defeating Mizzou in the SEC championship game. However, let's consider that Michigan State had basically the same resume as Auburn. They went 12-1, just like Auburn, winning a Big Ten championship, defeated an Ohio State team that had won 24 consecutive games in the Big Ten championship game. And they were left out. So Auburn, in my eyes, earned the playoff spot just as much as Auburn did, Michigan State did. They lost to Notre Dame by a score of 17-13 in South Bend, a game that was marred by a ton of pass interference plays that were pretty questionable, to be kind. They were actually bad calls, most of them. So Michigan State lost a game against Notre Dame by 4 points. Notre Dame wasn't very good. I think they finished at 7-6 that year after they went to the BCS championship game the year before. Auburn lost to LSU by 2 touchdowns, 35-21. And we also had a Baylor team that doesn't get a whole lot of consideration because they lost their bowl game to UCF by 10 points. But that Baylor team went 11-1, and they were the Big 12 champion. So there is some consideration there for Baylor as well. Ohio State lost the Big Ten championship game. So just a bit of a side note there. They had the same record, of course, but they lost the Big Ten championship game. So in 2013, Florida State, national champion, confirmed, no question, BCS champion. However, Michigan State could have been in that game. Baylor could have been in that game. And those are the two teams that earned a spot just as much as Auburn, and especially Michigan State, because they had to play a number 2 ranked Ohio State team in the Big Ten championship game. Baylor did not play a Big 12 championship game, so they had one less data point, one less tough team to play. And if we get any calls on this year, we will dissect the schedules. But I'm not going to run through all the schedules until we have the conversation with all of you. So if anybody wants to call about 2013, it's Florida State with the national championship. Michigan State and Baylor will get a side note as teams worthy of playing in the BCS championship game. Now let's go to 2012. What do we do about teams on probation? This is going to be the first one where we're going to deal with a team that earned a spot on the field, but so, of course, Notre Dame and Alabama played in the BCS championship game, and the Tide smoked Notre Dame. So Alabama is national champion. And Notre Dame finished at 12-1 after losing that game. However, we have first and foremost an Ohio State team that went 12-0. Tattoo Gate and NCAA violations forced out Jim Tressel and resulted in a bad Ohio State season in 2011. That was coached by Luke Fickell, of course. And instead of appeasing the NCAA and not playing in a bowl game and taking themselves and removing themselves from postseason eligibility in 2011, Ohio State AD Gene Smith did a rather foolish and stupid thing and went ahead and played a bowl game with 2 6-6 teams involved that did not matter except for lining the pockets a bit. And Ohio State lost that game anyway. It didn't matter. They finished 6-7, and the NCAA slapped them with a postseason ban in 2012, even though Ohio State had hired Urban Meyer as the head coach Again, why you go ahead and play that game, I have no clue. And I just think that was one of the most boneheaded moves that I can think of from an athletic director. And it burned Ohio State. So they went 12-0, but there's no guarantee that they would have won the Big Ten championship game. Logic says that they would have. They were certainly the better team in the game. Wisconsin went instead of Ohio State, and they blasted Nebraska with 70 points. And Ohio State drubbed Nebraska that year. So most likely Ohio State would have drubbed Nebraska again. So we've got the matter of Ohio State in 2012. We also have a Florida team that gets little consideration, but look at that. They were number 3 in the country under Will Muschamp. Now they lost the Sugar Bowl to Louisville. So we are not going to give them a co-national championship because they blew it. Any possibility of that happening by our system in the Sugar Bowl, they lost to Teddy Bridgewater, Charlie Strong, and Louisville. Now this Oregon team, however, they defeated Kansas State. So you had a matchup of Oregon and Kansas State in the Fiesta Bowl. Ducks won at 35-17 and were, of course, the much better team in that game. So under consideration for postseason play, you really had 5 strong candidates here with record-wise. Now, if Ohio State would have been eligible, then you've got a nice 6-team playoff for those people that like 6-team playoffs. And again, Oregon State defeated Kansas State. So when it all comes out in the wash after postseason play, Alabama, of course, won the national championship in resounding fashion. However, Oregon finished 12-1 with the same record as Alabama at 12-1. Oregon, I believe, lost to Stanford. That's the reason they did not play in the Rose Bowl. Stanford defeated Wisconsin, but they already had 2 losses, and Oregon lost that game to Stanford. So Oregon's loss was a good loss. They lost 17-14 in overtime to Stanford. Alabama's loss was to Texas A&M, who finished 11-2 and won the Cotton Bowl with Johnny Manziel at quarterback. So Alabama 12-1, Oregon 12-1. Those are your national champions, along with, had they lost a game. So this is my reasoning here. Let's say Alabama and Oregon are 12-1 and Ohio State's on probation and they go 11-1. But since they did not play the Big Ten championship game, could not go to postseason play to play the BCS championship game. Okay, those are 2 high-end, high-leverage games that they could have slipped up and lost, and not having those data points, I would not consider Ohio State. However, Ohio State went 12-0. There could be an argument, I think it's a weak one, but there could be an argument to say Ohio State's the national champion in 2012 because they were the only undefeated team in college football. However, did not play a Big Ten championship game, did not play a postseason game. Therefore, our 2012 national champions are Alabama, Oregon, and Ohio State. So let me mark that down as we have our first deviation to history, 2012, Alabama, Oregon, Ohio State. And you also have Kansas State and Florida, who earned just as much of a right to play in a sense, you know, especially looking at the playoff era where we are allowing teams to play in the playoff that did not win conference championships. Well, Florida had just as strong a season. Actually, if you look at that 2012 Florida team and their schedule, they had a rough schedule, and they were phenomenal that year against that schedule. So Florida could have played in the BCS championship game. Now they lost to Georgia, and that knocked them out of the SEC championship game. And as a side note, we've got to give it up for Georgia. Georgia, of course, took Alabama to the wire in the SEC championship game. Many believe, as I do, that those were the two best teams in college football. Nick Saban's Alabama Crimson Tide and Mark Richt's Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC title game. And Georgia just needed a few seconds or an incomplete pass, but they didn't need the ball to be deflected and caught at the 4-yard line to run out the clock. So a side note for Georgia, but that was their second loss. And so they're eliminated from contention and should have been ranked higher, I believe, than 11-2 at number 7 in the country after barely losing the SEC championship game. But that is a really strong field from 1 through 8 that we saw in 2012, even 1 through 9 or 10 in 2012. So interesting year of 2012. We go with Bama, Oregon, Ohio State, with the side note that Kansas State and or Florida could have played in a playoff or in the BCS championship game. I really don't like this background. Who threw this background up here? Not a fan. Let's go with that. All right. Now let's go to 2011. Maybe I will split up the BCS since this is going to take a while. We will split up it. So this is not for the faint of heart. This is a marathon. We're going to do this the right way. Again, I'm not going to dive through all the schedules. We will look at schedules if you make the call and you want to talk schedules. And of course, we'll take your comments and questions as well. Okay, let's go to the BCS in 2011. What is this? All right, there we go. 2011, final BCS rankings. LSU, Bama, Oklahoma State, Stanford. I forgot about Stanford. Why does Stanford not get any love like Oklahoma State does in 2011? I believe because, let's see, 2011, Stanford did play in the Rose Bowl, and they defeated Wisconsin, correct? Or no, that was Oregon, Wisconsin. So Oregon obviously defeated Stanford. That denied Stanford of the Pac-12 championship. Okay, so let's take it from the top. LSU played a murder schedule, and they made their way through it at 13-0. They defeated Bama in the game of the decade, the century, 9-6 in overtime in Tuscaloosa, but had to face the Tide again, of course, in the BCS championship game. So Bama makes the BCS title game at number 2, did not win the SEC, did not win the division. Oklahoma State, of course, on that infamous Thursday night game at Iowa State after the tragedy, lost that game against a bad Iowa State team. So they had a bad loss. Alabama did not have a bad loss. So on the side of Bama, in terms of an argument, is obviously playing in the best conference and losing to the best team in the country by a field goal in overtime. On the side of Oklahoma State's argument is we're a conference champion. And we already saw LSU and Alabama play. And this isn't baseball, or this is not the NFL where we've got rematches all over the place. If there's a rematch, there's the thought process that we've already seen that game, and there's a ton of other games that we would love to see, and we are denied those games. So why play a rematch? Again, the Stanford-Oregon situation is mighty interesting because Oregon won the Pac-12. They won the head-to-head against Stanford, but Stanford's sitting there as well at 11-1 without a conference championship, much like Bama. We will check out the score of Stanford-Oregon just to catch up with that one. Boise State at 11-1, group of 5 team. We're not going to consider them. If they were undefeated, we would. So 2011, Bama wins the national championship. Now, correct me here. Oklahoma State and Stanford played in the Fiesta Bowl, and Oklahoma State won that game, correct? Therefore, as a 12-1 football team, along with Bama at 12-1. We've got to look at Oklahoma State as a national champion as well, correct? And then we've got this situation with, okay, Oregon's got 2 losses out. Stanford, well, they lost to Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl, so done. There's your national championship. Alabama, Oklahoma State. And you know what? The way we are sizing these seasons up, these championship games, in a sense, no longer become championship games because they are just another data point on the resume. This is not the NFL where teams play in the regular season and then they play in the playoffs. I know LSU lost to Alabama in the championship game, but should Alabama have even been there? And LSU and Alabama split. And so they both finished. Actually, LSU finished with a better record at 13-1 than Bama's 12-1. So a lot of people aren't going to like this, but LSU should get a share of the national championship. They split 2 games with Alabama, and they had a better record, and they were the SEC champion. So your national championship in 2011 is LSU, Bama, and Oklahoma State. All right. Have we received any comments coming in? Yeah, let's get to some comments here. So we've got Nick. Nick, appreciate you being here. My now pregnant GF grandfather. Okay. Hated Ohio State, but since being pregnant when, whoa, okay. Too many acronyms here, but since being pregnant, when she saw a Buckeye logo, she loved it. This must mean Ohio State fans have the logic of a pregnant woman with out of whack hormones. Makes sense. Wow. That statement, for you to conclude that statement, Nick, with the term makes sense, just underlines how ridiculously nonsensical that all is. So you basically put in boldface and underlined how ridiculous that statement is by stating that it makes sense. Okay, but you're contributing here to the Voice of College Football. So, Nick, we will continue to read your comments. So thank you for that. I believe you're a Michigan fan. Jason coming in just with a hello. Good to see you, Jason. Appreciate your contribution. Thank you so much for that. So we will continue on. Let's see if we go through the BCS and we put it into 2 parts. We're going 1998, 13. That is, I believe, 16 seasons. So we can go 98 through 06, 98 through 05. So we're going to go through 06. We'll go back to 06. Then we'll take your calls. Okay. There it goes for 2011. I know that's messy. I know a lot of people don't like that, but follow the logic. 2010, I think this is cut and dry. This is, of course, the Oregon-Auburn year, unless Oregon fans want to claim that Michael Dyer was down, which, hey, I understand. But that's a whole other thing. We are not disputing. These are 2 things we're not doing in this process. We are not predicting who would have won games that weren't played. And we are also not changing officiating. We may note those issues. So this is pretty cut and dry. Auburn, Oregon both go undefeated, win their conferences, and play in the national championship. Auburn wins on a last-second field goal. And the only consideration to be made here is that TCU went undefeated. Now, TCU played Boise State, correct? No, this is 2010. They beat, TCU beat Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl. What do we do with TCU? We're going to have to look at their schedule. We are going to have to look at TCU's schedule. That's all there is to it, because I've got to validate this schedule. we have to validate this schedule because they are 13-0. They won the Rose Bowl. They beat a Wisconsin team that was number 5 in the country that tied for the Big Ten championship. Let's see if Auburn shares this championship. 2010 TCU. This is going to be a tough call. Okay. They beat a top 25 Oregon State team by 9. They beat Baylor by 35. That would have been with RG3. SMU probably was no good. They beat them by 17. They marched through this marginal conference. They beat a Utah team that was number 6 in the country by 40. Then they beat Wisconsin. All right, let's look to see how good these teams were in that conference. Utah went 7-1, went 10-3 overall, and TCU beat them by 40. Air Force was decent, 9-4. San Diego State 9-4. They beat Air Force and San Diego State. Beat San Diego State by 5, beat Air Force by 31. How good was Oregon State? They started in the top 25, but they finished 5-7. What do you guys say? Thumbs up or thumbs down on TCU in 2010? I just can't pull the trigger. If Auburn or whoever won the national championship would have lost a game and TCU was undefeated, I would give them a share. But with that schedule, I just can't do it. I respect the Wisconsin win. I respect beating Utah by 40. Really good team. Couldn't have done anything else. But you know what? If we're going to give UCF championships in 2017, although the national champion had a loss, the national champion here did not have a loss. Okay. The group of 5 tiebreaker in my eyes is that they have to have a better record to garnish any kind of consideration. So TCU, sorry, no championship for you in 2010. It's just not there. All right, let's go to 2009. Again, we're going to go through 2006, and then we'll take your calls. Here we go with 2006. What am I doing? Not with 2006, with 2009. 2009 was, of course, Alabama, Texas. And this is, I believe, going to be really cut and dry here. What's going on with the BCS? Oh, why are they not showing the... Oh, there's the final. Okay. All right, this is 2009. Really, the only consideration, Cincinnati, TCU. We'll get to them in just a second. So 2010 was Auburn by themselves. 2009. Alabama beat Texas, 2 undefeated teams. That's, man, gets no better than that. Okay. Cincinnati got blasted by Florida. Got completely trucked. Done. TCU and Boise State played in a bowl game. I believe the Poinsettia Bowl. Let's check that game out. I'm just curious because I don't remember the game. I don't think it was the prettiest game in the world. I think Boise State won by, I don't know. I don't remember. Let's look it up because that's the only other consideration. But I am not going to share a national championship because, again, we're going to stay with our rules. And since the group of 5 teams did not win those games. Okay, Boise State won the game. Yes, I thought it was fairly ugly. 17-10. So look at this Boise State team. They defeated an Oregon team that won the Pac-12 and went to the Rose Bowl in the famous LeGarrette Blount play. The fight. But other than that, oh my word. Miami of Ohio, Fresno State, Bowling Green, UC Davis, Tulsa, Hawaii, San Jose State, Louisiana Tech, Idaho, Utah State, Nevada, New Mexico State. Okay, Sorry, Boise State. You will be a footnote. We credit you with doing all that you could against that schedule. And really, nobody was that good in the conference. The two best teams were Nevada and Fresno State at 8-5, and Idaho 8-5. They had the win against Oregon, the Pac-12 champion, but that's just not enough against an SEC champion. All right. So 2009 is simple. It's Bama. Or, yes, 2009, Bama. I lost my... Back to 2008. Oh, boy. These next two are going to be pretty ridiculous to try to sort through. Here we go. 2008. There it is. Look at all those one-loss teams. Good Lord. What happened? I got the wrong. Oh, boy. That is the list of BCS rankings going into postseason play. 2008. Oklahoma 12-1, Florida 12-1, Texas 11-1, Bama 12-1, USC 11-1, Utah 12-0, Texas Tech 11-1, Penn State 11-1, Boise State 12-0. Ouch. Okay. Well, Florida beat Oklahoma in the championship game. That eliminates OU. Texas defeated Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl in the final 15 seconds of the game. So Texas finished 12-1. Oklahoma played in the Big 12 championship game 13 I'm sorry. Strike Oklahoma, they lost. Florida 13-1 with the championship game win. Texas, since they did not play in a conference championship game, 12-1. Bama lost to Florida. That knocks them out. USC won the Rose Bowl over Penn State, 12-1. Really dominated a Penn State team that was 11-1 Big Ten champion. Impressive win. Forget the final score, 38-24. It was a blowout. Utah beat Bama, who was number 1 and 12-0 going into the SEC championship game. Utah beat them by 2 scores in the sugar and finished undefeated. And of course, Utah at that point was not a Power 5. They were a Group of 5 team. Texas Tech, I believe, got upset in their bowl game to finish 11-2. Otherwise, we might be awarding Texas Tech, and God rest his soul, Mike Leach, with a national championship. But I believe Texas Tech, I'm going to have to check on Texas Tech. I believe that's this year they lost to... They got upset in a bowl game against like Cal or Arizona State. And then we got to check on Boise State. So let's look at Texas Tech and Boise State. And I'm curious about the Utah schedule as well. Although, again, since the national champion has 1 loss, Utah had none. Let's give this a look. 2008 Texas Tech. Taking your calls after we go through 2006. This is, yes, there's the loss. Oh, they lost to Ole Miss. I remember that. Cotton Bowl. Yes. Yeah. So Texas Tech, done. 2008 Boise State. And Boise State was good. Man, they were ripping off the wins, huh? Oh, they lost to TCU. So that's interesting. They played back to back. So that's the game I was talking about, the Poinsettia Bowl. Then they played in the Fiesta Bowl. Okay, so Boise State's out since they lost the bowl game. Now, let's check out Utah. Shoot, wrong year. 2008 Utah. Okay, this schedule is not going to be anything great. That Michigan win. Michigan was awful. That was the Michigan team that went 3-9. Okay, so that's not anything. Oregon State, we'll have to look them up. They weren't ranked at kickoff. TCU, so they got a nice win against TCU, but only 13-10. Nice win against BYU late in the season, who was number 16. And of course, that Alabama win. And because, again, the national champion, Florida, was 12-1. I'm going with Utah here because they were 13-0. With the group of 5 schedule, if they had the same record, they would be out. But that's not the case. So your national champions of 2008, Florida, step aside because you've got to include Florida, Texas, USC, and Utah. All right, 2007. More fun. This one's going to be even worse or better if you like the argument. (2007). Oh boy. So going into the BCS championship game, look at that. The number 2 team in the country had 2 losses. No undefeated teams. Unless you go down to Hawaii, and of course, Georgia slapped them around, so they're done. Wow. Ohio State was number 1. LSU beat them in the championship game. So Ohio State out. LSU 2 losses. Virginia Tech, that's the year they played West Virginia and got stomped, correct? No, West Virginia beat Oklahoma. Virginia Tech in 2007. All right. Virginia Tech, Oklahoma, Georgia. Georgia beat Hawaii. Missouri, USC also won the Rose Bowl. Kansas finished 12-1. They defeated, so Kansas slapped around Virginia. Man, I'm getting this confused. West Virginia smashed Oklahoma, and Kansas smashed Virginia Tech, correct? Regardless, I know those 2 teams won their bowl games by big margins. We've got a mess. This is a mess. Your national champion, if you're just going by record, you ready for this? Do you see it? Who's the national champion? If you just go by record, it's Kansas. If you're just going by record, your national champion. Okay. But the Kansas issue is they didn't play in the Big 12 championship game, and they lucked out in scheduling this year. I've looked at this. They didn't play the top teams in the Big 12. Not their fault. And of course, Kansas being Kansas played absolutely no one non-conference. Look at that. Central Michigan, Southeastern Louisiana, and Toledo and FIU. That was back when the Big 12 was playing 4 non-conference games. Look at that. Okay. Kansas State finished. They beat Kansas State by 6. Kansas State finished 5-7. So forget that number 24 ranking. They beat Baylor, Colorado, Texas A&M, Nebraska, Oklahoma State, Iowa State. Were any of those teams any good? Kansas did not play Oklahoma or Texas or Texas Tech. They did not play 3 of the 4 best teams in the conference. Not their fault, but still, the best team Kansas beat in the regular season was Oklahoma State 7-6, Texas A&M 7-6, Nebraska went 5-7 that year. Kansas played a horrible schedule. All right, but they only lost one game, and they lost to Mizzou. That knocked them out of the Big 12 championship game. They lost to Mizzou by 1 score. Then they beat Virginia Tech. Yes, that's right, in the Orange Bowl. I get confused on these games in 07. Yes. So I had that right. Didn't remember the score. Got that confused. 48-28 is going to be the West Virginia-Oklahoma score. This one's 20-21. So they squeezed by a top 5 Virginia Tech team. Give them all the credit in the world, but that is a bad schedule. So Kansas could not win the national championship by themselves. No way. 2007. And so then the rest of these teams. So this is going to hopefully be a conversation that somebody's going to want to have, because I think the national champions are LSU, Georgia, who did not play in the SEC championship game because they lost to Tennessee, who played LSU. We would have loved to have seen Georgia and LSU play in the SEC championship game. And I do understand the argument that LSU lost 2 overtime games. They still lost the games, so they're losses. But in regulation, they tied these games. If it would have been 10 years earlier, 11 years earlier, they would have been 11-0-2. So Georgia gets a share of the national championship. USC and Kansas. While we're at it, Arizona State, just curious. So Arizona State was 10-2, and I don't remember what they did. They lost to Oregon and USC by 12 and 20. Then they lost their bowl game against Texas, so forget about them. All right, that's a messy 2007 with 4 national champions. Okay, 2006, then we take your calls. All right. So 2006, there was the setup right there for the championship. Oh, got the wrong. Bam. Okay, Ohio State, Florida. Ohio State was consensus number 1 all year, got annihilated by Florida. Buckeyes gone. Okay, of course, there was the battle or the argument that Michigan could possibly play in the national championship game since they only lost to the consensus number 1 team by a field goal in Columbus, but that did not happen. Florida rightfully in winning the SEC, and this is not the SEC of today in regards to perception. This was an SEC that was debated to be possibly the number 1 conference, but not necessarily. But Florida defeated Arkansas by, I believe, 10 points to get the number 2 spot. And really, Louisville in 2006, they went on and defeated Wake Forest in the Orange Bowl. Wake won the ACC, yes, and Louisville beat them in the Orange Bowl. But you got to consider this is Louisville of the American Conference, or the Big East at that point. And I don't know that we can award Louisville part of this national championship. That Wisconsin team, that's an interesting little side note there. That Wisconsin team, they finished 12-1. They beat Arkansas in the Capital One Bowl. Michigan went to the Rose Bowl. So you had a real logjam in the Big Ten where Ohio State went to the BCS championship game with no losses. Michigan, with 1 loss, went to the Rose Bowl, and Wisconsin, with 1 loss, losing to Michigan, went to the Capital One Bowl and beat Arkansas, who lost the SEC championship game. So if you're looking at records, Florida went 13-1. Louisville, I'll double check. I believe they beat Wake Forest pretty handily in the Orange Bowl to go 12-1. Wisconsin 12-1. Boise State, that's the team that beat Oklahoma to finish 13-0. So they're going to have a claim for the national championship. Let's check out Louisville. Curious about Louisville. This schedule is not going to be great for sure. And I know you guys can't see it because I switched screens. So 2006 Louisville. This is back when they played Kentucky the first game of the season. That's crazy. And they whipped Kentucky by 31, and I'm sure Kentucky sucked. There's number 15, Miami. They blasted them by 24, that Miami team, 2006. Don't think that they finished that well. We'll check them out. No other ranked teams until they played number 3, West Virginia. Beat them by 10. Lost to Rutgers. I remember that one. Yes, ESPN. I think that was a Thursday night game. Lost to Rutgers, who only, I believe, lost one game that year. And then decent wins against South Florida, Pitt, Connecticut. Okay. And then there's the Wake Forest game. They won by 11 in the Orange Bowl. Let's see how good these, where are the Big East rankings or standings here? So West Virginia, yeah, they were good. They went 11-2. Rutgers went 11-2. So those are quality wins. And South Florida is a decent win at 9-4. I did not see them play Cincinnati. Yeah, they did. They beat them by 6. This Miami team faltered. I'm almost positive. Yes, they went 7-6. So our national championship, and I'm sure Jackson is just ready to pounce on this. Our national championship of 2006. Oh boy. I'm going, man, the Big East was a Power 5 conference at the time. It was by far the worst. It was the pick your poison, the Pac-12 or the ACC of 2006. But defeating West Virginia and Miami and some other decent teams like Cincinnati and Pitt and South Florida and Rutgers, or they lost to Rutgers by 3, and then they backed it up with a win over the ACC champion in the Rose Bowl. So 2006 is Florida. It's almost strange in a way, even though that Ohio State loss was just a crushing loss. If you give Louisville a share of the national championship at 12-1, Ohio State's 12-1, they're the Big Ten champion. And they beat Michigan. They didn't play Wisconsin. And if Wisconsin's going to get a share of this national championship, oh boy. That's where it gets tricky. And Boise State, yeah, they beat Oklahoma. They're the national champions. So I got to tell you, got to think through this 2006. Everybody thought 2007 and 2008 would be difficult, and they were, but there's a logical summation of the teams that should be on the list. 2006, it's Florida, obviously. But if you include anyone else, aside from possibly Boise State, since they were undefeated, if you include Wisconsin, because they were 12-1 and had the same record as Florida, or the same number of losses, technically, then you have to include Ohio State back in the mix and just say they lost one game, just like Florida lost a game. And that 2006 Florida team, I believe, lost to LSU. All right. So that's where we stand right now. I've got to do some thinking about 2006, and maybe some folks can help me out. I'm a bit flummoxed. All right. Any comments or questions? I don't see any. So let's go to the calls. We got Dr. Buckeye on the line. David, how you doing tonight? We cannot hear you.
May have hit the mute button. My bad.
You're good. How's it going tonight?
Excellent. Just interesting reviewing some of these years. Gosh, '06. We'll start at the top. Everybody I know was begging for the rematch that year, or some people were begging for the rematch. Um, I thought at the time, I mean, Florida was a one-loss SEC champion. Although, by the way, once you get to 2004, and you're going to you imagine, by the way, once you get to 2004, you talk about that Auburn team. You'd say an undefeated Auburn team, an undefeated SEC champion, is not going to play for a national championship. Imagine telling somebody that today, by the way, about that.
Absolutely. I say that all the time.
About that
I say
04.
that all the time. So, David,
Yeah.
of course, we're going to talk about what you want to talk about, but I
Sure.
just got to throw this scenario by you because
Yeah.
I think you get what I'm trying to do here, and that's
Yes.
line up resumes and not nitpick them down to the final. Oh well, your eighth best win was against the 7-5 team, and their eighth best win was against the 4-8 team, so you win the national championship. As long as they're comparable records, or in the group of 5 scenario, or I like in Kansas having missed the 3 best teams in the conference that year to a group of 5 type of schedule with just that awful non-conference schedule that Kansas played, that you have to be 1 game better if
Right.
you're a group of 5, or if you play that horrendous of a schedule. But here, either Florida is solely the national champion,
Yeah.
or since Boise State has the 1 game on them as an undefeated team, plus they backed it up against Oklahoma, a
Right.
top 8 team in the country,
Yeah.
that it's Florida, Boise State. But as soon as you introduce the possibility of Wisconsin at 12-1, because they've got a 12-1 record,
They do.
as a Power 5 team, then you've got to reintroduce Ohio State, because there's no way you can award Wisconsin with a share of a national championship without putting Ohio State back in the mix.
Well, yeah, Ohio State did not play Wisconsin that year. So,
Yes.
I think Wisconsin's, if you look at Wisconsin's quality wins, I think they had a decent win over Penn State. Their only loss was in Ann Arbor, and then they did beat Darren McFadden's team in
Yes.
that Arkansas team, which was a decent win. So, I mean, and then I'm trying to think of, by the way, Boise State's quality wins other than beating, which I think was a very good Oklahoma team. I don't know if that was the best of the Bob Stoops teams, but it was, Adrian Peterson was on that team. Tough way to lose his last game at Oklahoma.
Yeah, here's Wisconsin.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, they go to the Big House, they lose by 2 touchdowns.
Right.
And the rest of these Big Ten teams, 2006, well, Penn State was
They
Penn
were
State.
okay.
They were okay.
Right.
That Penn State team, 06, I think they beat Tennessee in a bowl game.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they beat Tennessee in the Outback Bowl.
Well, yeah, that was kind of sandwiched in between. Like Paterno's last 2 good teams were that '05 team, which I think which we lost a tough one to. I actually think '05 Penn State was probably one of his top 5 or 6 teams I've ever seen him have. That was a really good team. Almost had controversy that year if Carr wouldn't have put 1 second on the clock and allowed Henny to throw a pass to Manningham to beat him up there. But yeah, I think that they were a decent Penn State team because there was 3 really, really good Big Ten teams in '06. And obviously that we know the top 2 were, and then Wisconsin was like a solid 3rd team, and Penn State was like a okay 4th team. Iowa was kind of a little bit, they were okay, but they were kind of down a little bit from maybe some previous, Kirk teams.
Yeah, so this schedule is not good.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you looked at the Boise schedule, if that's that much better outside of
Well,
beating.
I don't think it's better, but
No.
So Arkansas might be the best team that they beat, and then Penn State. It's close between those 2.
Yeah.
And really nobody else was that good. And look at that non-conference schedule: Bowling Green, Western Illinois, and San Diego State.
Well, see, if you look at Florida's, they ran the gauntlet that year, Mark.
Yeah,
they
they
in the
did.
SEC. Although, and the crazy thing about it is, and I would say this to Urban, I watched Florida play 5 or 6 times that year, and I got to be honest with you, they got lucky to win a lot of games. They lost by 10 points at Auburn to a good but not great Auburn team. They barely beat a mediocre Florida State team by a touchdown. And I'm I'm thinking to myself, we lost to this team by 27 points.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm serious. I mean, we
I
made
know.
Chris Leak look like Joe Montana and Tom Brady had a baby or something. I still think that month off and bad coaching cost him that game. You know, I
And yeah, and
I mean,
based
I
on the conversations I've had with people that should know,
yeah,
they made Ted Ginn way too much of a centerpiece in the game plan. And so once they lost him on the opening kickoff, like half the game plan was gone.
yeah, maybe true. I've always stipulated that actually the best Tressel team was the year before. His most talented team was his '05 team. They just had to
Yeah.
play a tougher schedule in '05 because they had to play the greatest Texas team of all time in '05 and probably one of the 5 or 6 best Penn State teams I've ever seen.
And
And they
still
only
should have beat that Texas team.
yeah, right. If Hamby catches the pass, they beat that Texas team. And they only lost those 2 games by a combined 10 points to the number 1 and number 3 teams in the country. There's not a lot of disgrace in that.
Not at all. Now
Yeah.
this '06 Boise State schedule is not good.
Yeah. I was
There's
trying to
nothing there.
Trying to think of who they beat.
Hawaii went it's right there. Hawaii went 10-3,
Yeah,
and the rest of these teams, but they
yeah,
went undefeated.
right. Yeah, I mean, by the way, I was going to point out too, that '08 year is also really, really interesting. I didn't want to gloss over '07. '07 is just the ultimate in craziness, by the way. I mean, we backed in. I mean, after we won up in the big house and, dispatched of Lloyd Carr in his last game up there, although he did go out on, I guess, a high note by beating Tebow in Florida. By the way, one of the only 2 coaches that Urban lost to in a bowl game was him and Dabo Sweeney.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
right. Although that '07 Florida team was not nearly as good as it was kind of sandwiched in between his 2 good teams, but in '06 and '08,
Which is kind of strange that Tebow won his Heisman the year that they lost 4 games.
yeah. Well, I just showed you he probably had to carry that team in '07 because they weren't as good defensively as they were in '06 and '08 probably. But yeah, the '07 year was just crazy. I mean, I think there's a lot of teams with claims. LSU, by the way, the last national champion or the only national champion I can remember to win the national title with 2 losses.
Yeah, and they're going to be the only one outside of a lot of these crazy claimed national titles from way back, even prior to the 70s. You would
Hmm.
have to go back to the 50s or 60s.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, it's interesting that they actually played LSU more competitively in that game than they played Florida. That game, swayed on a couple of plays. I we talked about my feelings about that '07 team and them, getting into that game, kind of just by dumb luck because everybody was losing. I mean, Missouri had a chance to get in and they lost. I mean, there was a bunch of teams that lost at the end of the year that allowed
West
them to get in.
Virginia.
West Virginia, yeah, Dave Wanstedt went in there and beat them in Morgantown late in the year. And then Rich Rod had to go take a job, right, Mark?
Yeah, had to go take a job. And yeah, that just could have been much different had West Virginia defeated Pitt, a 4-7 Pitt team. That conclusion to that season was so crazy that Ohio State was number 7 the
Yeah,
week that they beat Michigan, having
right.
lost to Illinois the week before,
That's right.
sitting at number 7, never played another game, not only made the championship game, but made it at number 1.
Well, yeah, that was basically by default because everybody had 2
Sure.
losses at the time. It was a wild year. The year of Appalachian State to our largest fan base there. The first game ever on Big Ten Network, wouldn't you know it, right, Mark?
Well, it's a good way to get started. Might as well have some drama.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but there was everybody. Stanford, Harbaugh got his big win at Stanford by beating USC early in the year that year. That was a
Yes.
crazy year. Um,
40-point spread in that game.
yeah, that was wild. I would say '08 is the most intriguing year. There's a lot of good options. It's tough because Texas beat Oklahoma, you know, and then Oklahoma gets that big win over Texas Tech. Texas loses Heartbreak Hotel by, with Michael Crabtree catching that pass to beat them. There was just some fun Big 12 football that year, in '08, by the way.
Yes.
Some really interesting games that year.
Yeah. For as crazy as '07 is, the '08 trying to do it the way we're trying to do it here is just as crazy, if not crazier, in determining a final champion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we played that SC team. They were a great football team. You can make a case for them. You could make a good case for Texas, especially considering they beat Oklahoma, you know.
Yeah. And that's why I'm saying it's, to me, Florida, Texas, USC, and Utah.
Although we had that Texas team, and that was the rubber match of us versus Texas. Heartbreak Hotel at the end with McCoy hitting that pass to Crosby to win it.
Yeah. And that was also Beanie Wells with 130 yards at halftime and then leaving the
Yep.
game, who was just running it down their throats.
Yeah, Beanie had a very interesting '08 after having a great '07. Just always seemed to find his way on the sidelines with some type of ailment. Yeah. So I think that I will say this: the 2011 year was always an interesting one. Like I said, it's amazing that LSU team just had to run too much of a gauntlet. By the way, that year, because Miles, man, they beat a lot of good teams that year. That 11 LSU team.
Yeah, they definitely did. Um, we can get to it here. I know they started out with Oregon. Was it Oregon?
Yeah, they beat Oregon. They won it. I believe they won at Morgantown and beat a really good West Virginia team that year.
Yeah.
And then they smoked everybody in the SEC team, including a pretty good, Georgia team in the SEC title game. And I think they have a few other quality wins that year too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So,
And then, of
yeah.
course, they won the 9-6 game, one of the ugliest
Yeah.
all-time
Yeah.
games ever.
They beat Alabama. They beat
Tuscaloosa.
Oregon, Mississippi State, West Virginia, beat Florida by 30.
Yeah.
Wow. Beat Auburn by 35. Yeah, they were just, I have seen rundowns. They beat Georgia in the conference championship game by 32.
Yeah.
That this was the most impressive run by anybody in modern history.
Yeah, I would say that I think that I would put it up there. It's just too bad they didn't get a chance to finish the deal.
Oh, they had the chance to finish the deal.
Yeah, I mean that,
They just
obviously that.
didn't.
Sorry about that, Mark. I was just adjusting my power there. But yeah, I think that I would say that, and by the way, all four of their title games played in the Superdome. What luck they have, by the way. And by the way, that kind of swayed the power too between Les Miles. Miles actually had Saban's number a little bit in the early going.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think that, of course, he won in '07. That was Saban's first year, and Miles won the national championship. But after that, it would have been Saban winning at least in '08 and '09. I think Miles came back in 10
Beat him
and
in
in
11.
11.
Right. So I had a 3-2.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
he was hanging in there against them.
Yeah.
And then after that, Saban or Miles never beat Saban again.
We posted a Les Miles video on his Hall of Fame candidacy today, by the way.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to catch that. I saw that you put that out there. Would you say you used to make like videos about how he would choke games when he was at?
Yeah, he was a gold mine of content, Les Miles and his stupid decisions.
Yeah, just think, Team Up North fans, he could have been your coach at one time.
If anybody's unfamiliar with Les Miles, and I know it seems strange, but he's been out of the game. Well, aside from the Kansas stint, he's been away from big time college football in the national spotlight since 16 now. We're going on 7 seasons.
Right.
So if you're new to um, college football, look up Les Miles and LSU against Ole Miss. If you just want to see one of his many blunders, I want to say 2015 or 16 against Ole Miss. I want to say
Mm.
2015 against Ole Miss. It's just unbelievable. They had plenty of time to run plays and set up for a game-winning field goal, and he's just frozen on the sideline, and the clock's just ticking, and the clock runs out.
Yeah, they lost another heartbreaker to Alabama in 2012
Yes.
in LSU
Yeah.
in a great night game on CBS. Remember, Alabama had to win that on a late touchdown.
Yeah, I think TJ Yeldon caught a swing pass and ran it for a touchdown.
Yes. Yeah, to all you people out there that say I don't watch anything other than Big Ten games, I do watch some SEC games from now and then. There to our SEC brethren that are out there who keep on saying we're just Big Ten people here. We watch your conference.
David, in recent days, and by days I mean probably weeks or months, you have
Yes.
gained quite the following and the angst from the chat.
Yes, I know the Team Up North fan base, which I love to get after. You know, I know it's high times for them after. Well, we get into some of these years. It's probably pretty painful because they have to remember the Rich Rod years and some Brady Hoke years. I mean, when Fred Flintstone was their coach, it wasn't always going well for them, and so we probably are going to talk about some mediocrity for them.
It took us until 2006 to mention Michigan.
Yeah, you probably weren't getting to too many good seasons over that period of time. Although Dependent Fanatic keeps on telling me they're back. Back beating us, but still losing bowl games. I guess that's called the late 80s as being back.
You're on a roll, David.
Well, hey, I'm sorry for stating facts. But
all right. Anything else? The calls are starting to pile up here.
Last thing I will say, just
Sure.
real quick about Ohio State, that 2012 team, very flawed Ohio State team, but Gene Smith really put it to them. They should have not played that 2011 game, had their shot at Notre Dame, but I don't necessarily feel bad because again, you said it, Mark, the two best teams in the country that year were Georgia and Alabama, I thought.
Yeah.
So.
Can you imagine Ohio State and Notre Dame playing in the BCS championship game that year with Alabama, Georgia, and even Oregon to a certain extent sitting on the sideline?
Yeah, would have been crazy.
Something.
Yeah, well, I mean, and maybe in a way it just it kind of ended up being justice that way, but because that was a flawed team, and I said they kind of took advantage of kind of a really weak Big Ten that year. Remember, the Big Ten was not good in 12. So.
I do think they would have beaten Notre Dame.
Oh, I think so too. That Notre Dame team won a lot of close games and was very flawed and obviously got exposed.
You know what's interesting about that year?
Yeah.
Is that Notre Dame beat Stanford on a controversial series of plays at the goal line where they held Stanford out of the end zone in overtime. That Stanford team won the Pac-12 championship with one loss and went to the Rose Bowl. They would have been undefeated and gone to the BCS championship game.
Yeah, I mean, they barely beat it like an okay Wisconsin team in that Rose Bowl. I remember it was a close game. It was only by like a touchdown.
But still, Stanford would have been undefeated. That would have been a Notre Dame Stanford. Well, they obviously played, so Notre Dame would have been 12-1 or 11-1. So I don't know how that would have shaken out. It probably would have been Stanford, Alabama, I guess.
Yeah, I think it probably washed out the way it should that year. Although, we would have loved to have had our chances, even though I think, like I said, that team had its flaws, even though it went undefeated. So.
Yep.
Good stuff, Mark. What are you going to run it back with the non-BCS years here in a couple days or what?
Oh, absolutely. We are. We're going to finish up with the BCS tonight, hopefully, and just keep going.
By the way, I would eventually have gotten a 98 and my feelings about that because I still have bad feelings, and you're right to bring that up, by the way. But
well, since we're splitting everything up into segments of time and formats, we are negating the one call per individual.
Yeah, I hear you.
Because if you want to call back in to talk about the next set, then feel free.
I hear you, Mark. Well, keep up the good work. Have a good show.
Thanks, David.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
take care.
We will keep it moving. We got Jackson on the line. Jackson, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. What you think about the little night lights I got?
The night lights. Let's give you some spotlight here. That's looking nice. Very nice, Jackson. Well done.
Oh, thank you, man. I want to go over like that miraculous 07 year and a little bit about the 2000 year. Like, good Lord, that was Miami got really screwed over that year.
Okay, we're only going to talk about the years we've gone over.
Oh, okay. The 2007 year, man, that was a holy cow. Like, South Florida was ranked number 2 that year at one point.
Yes.
Like Rutgers exposed them. And, everyone was at least 1 or 2. Yeah. And Missouri, West Virginia were looking to clinch a spot for the Natty, but then Oklahoma came to spoil it all, and Pittsburgh came to spoil it all for them. Then we got like Ohio State, LSU, and like you said, it was the only year where a 2-loss team won it all. And 06, man, the Big East was just stacked. It was just stacked. I mean, we're talking Louisville, and Rutgers, West Virginia. I mean, when you talked about Rutgers.
Are you joking with me on this one, Jackson? The Big East was stacked?
Well, those top 3 teams were stacked for sure.
Okay.
I mean, it was
by Big East standards, I would agree with you, but I will still say it was the worst conference in college football.
Well, true. I mean, it's such a shame that year they didn't get like a second BCS team in. But
really?
Yeah, well, because like Rutgers and West Virginia were really good. I mean, but that Cincinnati win over Rutgers, it was
I think, Jackson, I appreciate your observation of and you are a student of the game. You're always bring to the table great stats and facts, but don't be fooled by those records.
I'll try not to be.
There's no way we wanted to see Rutgers or South Florida or Cincinnati or whomever to be in any kind of BCS games that year.
Oh man, it was.
Louisville played Wake Forest, and Wake Forest didn't belong in a BCS game that year.
Yeah, but still though, it was like that was pretty amazing in of itself. Wake Forest winning an ACC title in college football that year.
Yeah,
and it was like, wow. And that was amazing. Let's see. So Rutgers was going to clinch a Big East title, but then West Virginia spoiled it all in triple overtime. So that was a fun night for West Virginia that night. And let's see, we're seeing like the final rankings of
that's 07.
Yeah. Oh man, that was I didn't like the year at the time when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I've got more appreciation for years like 2007, because it was like everyone was 1 or 2. So we're looking at Oklahoma. They went down against Texas Tech, and they went down against Colorado. And Colorado, man, they were good enough as a bowl team, but they were good enough to upset Oklahoma that day. It was on September 29th in week 5. And that was also the last time that, well, let's see. Yeah, that was last time Bama lost to a Power 5 team in non-conference games, but that's neither here nor there. So that was pretty big. So we're looking at Virginia Tech. Oh man, Kansas, Missouri. Can you believe College Game Day went to Kansas, Missouri that year? That was amazing. On rivalry week, we're looking at Hawaii. They were unbeaten. Oh man, Colt Brennan, he and June Jones, they were top notch. I mean, that game that they had against Boise State on Black Friday, wow. Yeah, I agree with James there. Like, I mean, I just don't know why they never had like a second Big East team in like BCS bowls in like some of the years, but like 2010, definitely, I agree. Don't have a second Big East team in that.
I think that there were some years that the Big East didn't deserve any teams in the BCS.
Like 2010, because it was like
Yes.
Connecticut was
I
so
still say that these records are skewed because the conference was not anywhere close to the other conferences.
right. It was wow. So, and we're looking at USC, right? And as you mentioned, they lost to Stanford as they were 40-point favorites. That pretty much started the awesomeness of the Jim Harbaugh era as a whole for like Stanford, 49ers, Michigan, so on and so forth. Um, then we see like Mike Bellotti and Oregon, just put a curb stomping on the USC Trojans. And had Dennis Ditson not been hurt against Arizona a few weeks later on Thursday Night Football, I honestly feel like in a way Oregon would have had a shot at the Natty had Ditson not got hurt.
That could be.
Yeah,
They free-falled after that.
they did. They fell to UCLA. They fell to Oregon State, but they did bounce back in the Sun Bowl against South Florida, which South Florida was going through a big collapse after they got upset by Rutgers on Thursday night. So that Southern slow. Listen over. None taken,
Alex, let's be nice. Come on now.
Oh, I was just saying none taken to Alex Martin. But oh man, so in Kansas, they had a magical year in 07. I was amazed by that year. And West Virginia, now we know they lost to Pitt on championship week. And on week 5, they lost to South Florida. That was one of the games that started that meteoric rise for South Florida in 07. One of the games that really helped South Florida was beating Auburn. Then 3 weeks later, they were beating up on West Virginia on Friday night. I mean, oh man. And I'm seeing Arizona State. As we looked on the schedule, they lost to Oregon, USC. Honestly, I was amazed that USC and Arizona State played on Thanksgiving Day that year. That was
Did they really?
Yeah, in 07. So that was on the fourth Thursday of 07. So let me think. That was on November 22nd of 2007. And let's see, Black Friday was on November 23rd. And 2 days after Thanksgiving was November 24th. So that was it was a big year that Dennis Erickson had that year in his first year at Arizona State. Although too bad they didn't win the Pac-10 at that time. And I believe when USC beat Arizona State, that was when like John David Booty was back from injury. So like he was hurting a little bit. He wasn't able to play against Oregon, which I think that took part in the loss to Oregon for USC. Mark Sanchez was the backup at that time. So, oh man. Missouri, they lost to Oklahoma twice. Oklahoma was just kryptonite for Missouri that year, weren't they, Mark?
Well, they beat them twice. Yes.
True. I mean, it's just like, oh man. Oh man. Chris Foot saying, how about playing in Honolulu, especially in 07? That had to have been a fun year to be a Hawaii football fan and to be in the University of Hawaii that year, especially. I mean, that was so awesome.
All right, Jackson, anything else you wanted to break down on this?
I'm okay. I'm going to go eat a little something.
There you go.
Get some steak. I'd offer it to you, but I can't be able to telepathically offer stuff yet because we're not in that Jetsons era yet, but we're getting there.
We are not quite there, but Jackson, I appreciate the thought.
All right.
Call back anytime, man.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
You too.
All right. Let's keep it rolling. Thanks for the patience, everyone. We got Mike on the line. Mike, how's it going?
Can't complain, Mark. How you doing?
I am doing just fine. What's going on tonight?
2006.
Yes,
I think you know where I'm going with this one.
I do.
I just can't stand the hypocrisy because in 2011, I thought the precedent had been set. Can't have two teams in the same conference, same division, play for a national championship again in a rematch.
Agreed.
I just don't get it because in that 2006 season, in fact, I think even after the Ohio State Michigan game, the BCS computers still had Ohio State 1, Michigan 2.
Yes.
And it was a controversial game I remember cringing because I remember that play when Troy Smith was, it was third and forever, country mile. And then Sean Crable hit him out of bounds.
Yep.
And then gave him a free set of downs, which without that, I really think Michigan had that game won. Because that was at a time when defense kind of took a back seat. Neither defense was stopping the other team. So if Michigan could have scored, which I imagine they did, and ran the clock out, Michigan had that game won.
Well, I think that's a bit overstated myself, but I get your point.
That there's obviously going to be some assumption, but
they would have had the opportunity, yes, to win the game, where, as it stood, they didn't have the opportunity to win the game. Ohio State ran out the clock with a 3-point lead, so it's not like Michigan had the ball down 3 and driving down the field with an opportunity to win. So even though the score was a 3-point game, it wasn't a 3-point game with the game on the line, Michigan with the ball. Ohio State ran out the clock. But to your credit, yes, that was a play that could have changed the game. Yes, Michigan would have gotten the ball, and we don't know.
Yeah, but it just seems like at least late in the second half, neither defense could stop the other team's offense. So based on that, I was pretty confident that Michigan could have scored.
Well, Michigan had stopped Ohio State's offense.
Apparently they didn't. Technically they did, but in the literal sense, no, because of that stupid play. And Michigan was a top 2 team. I remember that season. Well, Wisconsin only had 1 loss too. The Big Ten was clearly, without question, the best conference that year. I don't think this is even up for debate.
Well, I would have to go back and really look at it. I think it is up for debate. Who did these teams defeat out of conference? That's the issue. You are looking at the top of the conference and seeing that Ohio State was undefeated until they lost the championship game. Michigan only had 1 loss to Ohio State before the Rose Bowl, and that Wisconsin only lost 1 game. But did those teams beat anyone out of conference? The answer is basically no.
Yeah.
Michigan had a great win against Notre Dame in terms of they blasted
tore
Notre
them
Dame. What was that, 38-0? But that Notre Dame team in 06,
I think they ended like 10-3 or something.
Yes, you might be right. 06, I think. No, it was the next year. No, that might have been the year that the Brady Quinn team lost to LSU in the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah. Now every conference has their losers, but Michigan was a rightful number 2. And I know that Florida and USC.
They didn't win a conference, and Florida played a brutal schedule and won the SEC, which was arguably the best conference.
I still put them as a silver medal in conferences that year. I'm not saying that Florida
Yes,
wasn't.
I know you do, but
I'm not saying that, especially because they didn't even have Tebow. That was the Chris Leak year. So I mean, for them to do that was pretty impressive. That was, was trying to think. That was the team. That was the team that lost to Auburn. Was it
I think they lost to LSU. I'd have to
LSU?
double check. Let me see. 06 LSU beat. Oh, maybe they did lose to Auburn. Let's see here.
Yeah, I mean it's
Auburn,
17 years ago. So
06. Yes, they did lose to Auburn 27-17.
yeah, so I mean that's a respectable loss.
Yeah, so that Florida team, you're not seeing what I'm doing. Let's see.
I mean I don't think it's as good of a loss as losing by a field goal in the shoe.
Oh no, but that's only one of. Look at this run of games. Tennessee was number 13. They beat them by 1. That Bama team, 06, wasn't that good. LSU, they beat them by 13. That LSU team won the Sugar Bowl. Lost to Auburn by 10. Beat Georgia by a touchdown.
I'm seeing a lot of close games there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
other
a
than
lot of close
the
games.
out of the conference crap. Probably
Yeah.
their
A lot of close games.
probably their
But
best.
I don't know how you leave a team that won arguably the best conference in America and was 12-1, how you leave them out of the BCS championship game. I totally get your point that when Ohio State and Michigan stepped off the field, I thought that they were the best teams in the country and that they should have rematched in a championship game. However, the postseason kind of proved that they weren't the two best teams in the country.
Yeah, I mean, and you argue the hindsight, but I don't. I think that you should go by who was still the two best teams, and it seemed like
We
it
don't
was
know who, anytime somebody says the best teams in the country, we don't know who the best teams are.
okay, most deserving. How about that?
Sure.
I mean, do you think that Florida was most deserving simply because of the close loss in the game?
I think that they were because, and I understand the Michigan point. Again, if we would rewind 17 years, I was arguing for Michigan to be in the BCS championship game.
And so were the computers, and so were a lot of analysts.
Well, no, the computers were until Florida then went and won the SEC championship game against a team that was ranked 8th in the country.
Oh, you mean going in to the actual bowls after the conference championships? The computers had put Florida over Michigan.
Well, yeah, I don't know how the breakdown was. We could see, let's see here. In 2006, is that's what I've got up here, yeah. So here's the Harris interactive poll. Had Ohio State 1, Florida 2,
Oh, I'm surprised you were able to find that.
Michigan 3. Okay, the AP, to your point, the AP after the Ohio State game. So after Ohio State beat Michigan, actually the AP had USC at number 2 and Michigan at 3 and Florida at 4.
Huh.
And then the next week, after Florida beat Florida State, after Florida beat Arkansas in the SEC title game, they moved up Florida to 2 because USC lost to whoever they lost to. I forget who they lost to. Did they lose to UCLA? Anyway, doesn't matter. They lost and dropped to 8. And so, yeah, Florida moved past Michigan. So regardless of what USC did, they moved up Florida past Michigan after they won the SEC championship game. That was in the AP poll. The coaches poll, is all of this on screen?
No, it's still stuck on the schedule for Florida.
Oh, I thought you were seeing all this while I'm doing all this.
No, it's been stuck on the Florida schedule.
Oh, I was showing all this. So this is the coaches poll. So after Ohio State beat Michigan, again, they had the same lineup, 1, 2, 3, 4, Ohio State, USC, Michigan, Florida. Then they did the same thing, moved Florida past USC after they won the SEC. So those are the human polls. Now, the Harris.
Well, I remember thinking that it was the computers that liked Michigan, and the human voters were liking Florida.
Yeah, that I don't recall. I just know, as we just saw, that Michigan still had the number 2 spot after losing.
Yeah, so I mean, I would have liked to have seen a rematch based on that, but I just think that this seemed like the first year in my recent memory that politics started playing a role in who gets it. I mean, more than just the typical X's and O's, but it started becoming more about feelings and ratings and appeasement.
Yeah, but I don't know how you can argue that, though. I think that's your feeling.
I'm sure it probably just is my feeling.
Well, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying, how do you know? Because Florida did have the argument of there shouldn't be a rematch. We won the SEC. We won an extra game, etc. And if you want to go through the schedules, I think Florida played a better schedule, but they're close.
Well, I would say that no 2 Florida wins were on par with Notre Dame and Wisconsin.
Oh, whoa. Well,
would you say that there were 2? What, LSU was probably their best win?
Well, yeah, from a record standpoint, they don't have a win on par with Wisconsin. We did look at Wisconsin's year, and that was nothing to write home about in terms of their schedule. You're right that Wisconsin had the best record. Now, again, there's Florida, and I unfortunately don't remember where all these teams landed. Like Tennessee, I don't think finished in the top 13 in the country.
No.
I believe they finished like 9-4. I'm almost positive they finished 9-4. Yeah, that Tennessee team lost to Penn State in the Outback Bowl. LSU won the Sugar Bowl over Notre Dame. So both LSU and Michigan crushed Notre Dame. That Auburn team was good. They weren't great. They lost that game on the road by 10. Georgia, Mark Richt, not one of his better teams.
And that was a neutral field. Always is.
Yes. And to your point, a lot of one-score games, a lot of tight games. Shoot, they beat South Carolina by 1 point.
Yeah.
They beat Vandy by 6. Yeah, they were squeaking by. And that Florida State game, which normally would be a big win, that Florida State team, I'm almost positive, went 7-6. So they weren't anything great. Tennessee was 9-4. Kentucky was 8-5. Georgia was 9-4. They beat them. Arkansas finished 10-4 after they lost to Wisconsin. The Auburn team that they lost to went 11-2.
Yeah, and if they'd have won that game, well, they'd have been undefeated. But if they had lost another team, and that Auburn win, that would have been on par with a Wisconsin team.
Well, the LSU, I would put LSU on par with Wisconsin. Actually, I think LSU was better than Wisconsin. They didn't have the record, but they were 11-2. So I get your points, and I agree with your points. I'm not arguing with them, although I'm playing devil's advocate.
I figured that.
I do think that, and you're right, the same logic was not wielded 5 years later.
Yeah, and that's my biggest gripe. Be consistent. If you just don't want a rematch for a national championship, fine, I get it. Don't do it. Especially because I don't think there were a lot of people wanting to see that. Considering the fact that the first game with LSU and Alabama, that could have been sponsored by Sominex. I remember watching that game. I'm going like, oh God.
Is that how we're
trying
supposed to be selecting teams because we don't like how they play? Like we would have during that era, especially, we would have had two teams from the Big 12 playing every championship game.
If they were 12-0 and 11-1.
And the thing that I will say about the Bama LSU matchup, as opposed to Ohio State Michigan, those were the two best teams in the country. That's difficult to debate. Like I would put a mortgage on it. Those were two NFL teams. Like they were so good.
Like I said,
Oklahoma State would have gotten trounced by either one of them.
I don't know if I go trounced. I think they probably would have lost to Alabama. I don't think they would have lost to LSU.
Yeah, that LSU team just smashed maybe one of the greatest schedules. Not maybe one of the greatest schedules, one of the most difficult schedules ever.
Yeah, I agree with that one. I guess I just kind of, give them an asterisk on that loss given the circumstances. And just, I don't know what it is about Iowa, but everybody, talks about how hard it is to win in Kinnick. I've seen a lot of championship dreams go down in Ames for some stupid reason. I don't think it has the same mystique as Iowa City, but I've seen Ames kind of ruined. I think they've done it to Oklahoma once or twice.
That Iowa State team went 6-7.
Oh, they're not good. And there were times where, Iowa wasn't really good on paper, but for some reason, when we lost them on a late, last second field goal, they weren't great. When they just blew the doors off of Ohio State, they weren't that. They were good, but they weren't great. So something about these Iowa teams, they might not be 10, 11 win games or 11 win teams, but for some stupid reason, I don't get it. You just can't play in their stadiums. It just something weird happens. So based on that, I've seen teams play Iowa State and Ames, and on paper they should win, even on the road, but just something happens. And keep in mind, the tragedy that just happened. I would have still had Oklahoma State over Alabama personally.
Oh, I would too, based on merit, but I don't think there's any. Like, if you're asking me my opinion, those two teams would have beaten Oklahoma State by 3 touchdowns. But if you're asking me who deserved it, who earned it, well, Alabama already got its shot. Oklahoma State only had 1 loss. Stanford only had 1 loss.
I don't think anybody was really blowing the horn for Stanford, though, were they?
I don't know that Stanford didn't play a better schedule than Oklahoma State.
I'd have to go through it, but I'll take your word on that one.
Well, the reason that Oklahoma State was getting all the love is because of the circumstances, number one, of their loss, and number two, because they won the Big 12. Stanford did not win the Pac-12 because their 1 loss was head-to-head against Oregon. And Oregon only lost 1 Pac-12 game.
Yeah, okay. I guess I can.
And they got whipped by Oregon. So I'm not touting Stanford that they should have been considered. They got blown out by Oregon by 23. But 2012 Stanford had a argument.
Now, was that when they
Next
played
year.
Wisconsin?
Yeah, they played Wisconsin. I'm sorry, Oregon had the better argument. So the Oregon team that did not play the year Alabama and Notre Dame played in the BCS championship game, that Oregon team went 12-1, beat a top 5 Kansas State team in the Fiesta Bowl, and their one loss was to a one-loss Stanford team, 17-14 in overtime.
Yeah, and I was a big fan of that Kansas State team. I think, was that miracle run with Colin Klein?
Yes.
I remember thinking, it almost kind of reminds me of the 2010 Auburn team where their quarterback pretty much just strapped the team on his back and carried them to as close to the promised land as Kansas State's ever going to get, at least.
Yeah.
Because Kansas State was ranked number 1 for
Yes.
a few weeks in the season. Then I think Alabama took them over.
All right, Mike. Anything else you wanted to hit on?
Nope. I talked about the main points. Thanks for having me, though.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate
Have
it.
a good one.
Good night. We will keep it moving. Amazon link in the description section of all the videos. Grab that Amazon link, put it somewhere where you will not forget it when you do your shopping. It's the same shopping experience. Yes, I could say more, but the Amazon link, grab it. Will, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, Mark. Really enjoying this series, of course. Cool. I think I gotta defend 2010 TCU a bit.
Okay.
I mean,
What do you have to defend them for? I was kind to them, but I just couldn't pull the trigger on that schedule stacking up to an SEC schedule.
I understand that, but I mean, they were beating teams down, up and down the field by 40 points that year. I think, I don't know. For me, that kind of pushes them above the other teams that are kind of just clinging on to wins.
Well, the deal is though that if that would have been another year where a Power 5 team won the national championship with loss, to me that's different. And then I would elevate them and give them a share. But let's look at it. I'm not seeing a whole lot here. Oregon State looks impressive as the top 25 team. They finished 5-7. And then the rest of these teams aren't good. Air Force was decent, 9-4. There was another team in here that went 9-4.
It's just the margin of, I know the strength isn't great, but just the margin of victories.
Oh, because they're winning games over Tennessee Tech by 55 points?
Well, not Tennessee Tech's FCS team, but the Utah one and the Air Force one, the amount by which they won.
Yeah, they are impressive, but you're looking at maybe Air Force being the 40th or 50th best team in the country. We're talking about the national champion. We're talking about considering them as the national champion. Okay, Air Force 9-4. Yeah, that Utah game's impressive. It is impressive. Had there been a playoff, then you throw them in there and see what they can do. And they beat San Diego State, who was the other best team on their schedule, 9-4. They only beat them by 5 at home.
Can I make a public service announcement?
Absolutely. Go to it.
Can people in the chat please take a chill pill? I don't know if people have been drinking tonight, but the personal attack.
I haven't been watching the chat.
It's been rough. I've been having to time people out more than I ever have.
Oh my goodness. We're timing people out, and we don't even time people out that often in here. But my good, trash talk about teams. Don't trash talk individuals. It's very clear. It's easy. There's a lot of gray area, but if you hold to that rule, then you're good to go. Tell all these folks that their teams suck in whatever creative fashion you can. That's much better than sucks if you can do it, if you can test your brain to that degree. Otherwise, there's no reason over college football or really anything else, to be attacking people. I'm sorry for anybody out there that's had to be exposed to that.
Thank you, Mark. And of course, every
There
time
you go, Christopher. Ohio State sucks. Okay, sure.
I always think it's fun to look at 2012. I mean, the ending really sucked, but the journey was fun. A lot of hugging my dad after these nail-biting victories. But I think it's fun to. I know we did this in 2018, but I think 2012 is kind of fun to. I thought it was be fun to compare Ohio State's schedule to Notre Dame's.
Okay, we can do that. No, Ohio State did not play a good schedule that year. I know that their big non-conference win was against Cal, and
Was Tedford still there?
That's a good question. I believe so. I believe that was pre-Sonny Dykes. Tedford, I believe, was still there. I'll double check. Ohio State only beat that Cal team, and I think Cal went 3-9, and Ohio State beat them by a touchdown. They also played, interestingly enough, a Blake Bortles UCF team. So anyway, we can dive into those schedules. I was also going to note real quick, as I said to somebody else, that the Stanford team, consider this, the 2012 Stanford team that lost to Notre Dame, as you well know, on that great goal line stand that was somewhat controversial. If they beat Notre Dame, they would have been 12-1. There would have been, you would think that would have obviously broken the tie with Notre Dame as a one-loss team, and we may have had an Alabama-Stanford BCS championship game.
That would have been fun. I mean, maybe not fun for Stanford. But, man, Stanford from 2010, 2011, and 2012. That was impressive. I mean, 2013, too. Those were good teams.
Yeah, they were excellent. And that's one of the reasons why when we start to talk realignment and I bring up Stanford and get all sorts of comments about Stanford sucks and why would anyone want them in a conference, boy, people have short memories. They were a good football program 5 years ago, and they were near elite for a good 5 or 6 year stretch there.
I mean, the big thing you can point to in Notre Dame's favor is the Michigan State. Looking at the Michigan State games.
Oh, did they blow out Michigan State?
In East Lansing. That was very satisfying.
Okay, so let me get this off the screen. Find it here. All right, so yeah, Ohio State was not impressive in these wins. I often like to cite the comment that Urban Meyer made after the Michigan game, because after each one of these wins, he would get pulled aside and they would ask him about his team, and he would say, we need to get better. We need to get better. And we're really not that good and all of that. And then when they beat Michigan, I still remember, I can't think of the sideline reporter. He's on a ton of big games. Can't think of the guy. Does a really good job. Anyway, he says to Urban, you've been saying all year that your team's really not that good, need to get better. This is not a great team. And Urban cuts him off and goes, this is a great team. This is an all-time great team. He goes, this should go down in Ohio State history as a great team. And I thought, Urban's only saying this because their season's over. They can't play any of their games. He might as well say that. He might as well cut it loose now and say, yes, we're undefeated. We're a great team. Yes. So Ohio State, the highlight of the opener there against Miami of Ohio is that Devin Smith made a ridiculous catch in that game. UCF, that was a close game. They only
was
won
O'Leary at UCF then? I think he probably was.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Was O'Leary was at UCF then, right?
Yeah, he was there. Blake Bortles was the quarterback of that team.
Oh, Blake Bortles was still there.
Yeah. there's the Cal game.
Yeah.
That was tied in the fourth quarter. And Cal was not good. UAB, we could look up the records. I don't remember, but they're a group of 5 teams. So I don't know if UAB was as good as they've been the last 3 or 4 years. And there's Michigan State, who, despite that number 20 ranking, did not finish number 20. I believe they won a bowl game against TCU to finish 7-6 or 8-5.
I think 7-6.
7-6, yeah. Nebraska went to the Big Ten championship game, and so that is who
That's
Ohio
impressive.
State would have played in the rematch in the Big Ten championship game, and they did perform in that game. That game was a rout from start to finish. They did crush Nebraska.
Nebraska had a bad defense that year.
Oh, they did. They had a bad and they had the other Martinez at quarterback.
What was his first name?
Shoot. Yes, the other Martinez. I'll come up with it. That Indiana team was not good, and that was a bit of that 52-49 was a little bit misleading, but still, that should not have been close, and Indiana was no good. Purdue was no good, and they barely, well, as you can see in overtime, they were down by 8 points on the final drive, and Kenny Guyton, in for an injured Braxton Miller, led like an 80-yard drive in the final minute to tie the game. They had to get a 2-point conversion. Then they won in overtime.
I remember Notre Dame also won on the final drive against Purdue that year too.
Oh, okay.
They brought in Tommy at the end because Everett wasn't doing that well. He got better as the year went on, and they brought in Tommy, and that was right after Tommy's he got arrested for I think it was public intoxication, and they booed him coming on the field. The Notre Dame fans booed him. Because of that.
Now, Penn State was decent. They weren't great. They were okay. They were coming off probation, or they were in probation at the time, on probation, and they were okay. They went 8-4 that year. And actually, it was kind of strange because Ohio State and Penn State were both on probation, that the Big Ten had to go to the third place team, Wisconsin, to go to the championship game. Illinois sucked. Wisconsin was pretty good. And that was, as you can see, I remember Ohio State had a goal line stand in the fourth quarter in that game. And despite Michigan finishing at 8-5, that was the Michigan team that ran into Jadeveon Clowney in the bowl game. They lost in like the last 10 seconds in that game. So they played really well against South Carolina. And as you well know, you guys barely beat them in South Bend. I thought that Michigan team was a lot better than their record.
I mean, Denard Robinson just didn't play well in that game. If he would have played well, who knows? That Notre Dame season could have went totally sideways.
Before we go to Notre Dame, I wanted to look at the records real quick. Yeah, Purdue was 6-7. Yeah, there was really nobody there besides Michigan, decent, and Michigan State kind of decent, okay, and Penn State decent. And they beat Wisconsin, who they were better than 8-6. They won the Big Ten championship by default. That was really weird. And then they beat Nebraska. So they beat like 4-5 pretty good teams, but they didn't beat anyone that good. I am curious what UCF did. UCF went 10-4, and they beat Ball State in a bowl game. And I know Cal was bad. I'm curious about UAB.
Not great.
Why did? Oh my word!
Yeah.
Look at that. So yeah, they did not play well against some pretty bad competition early in the season. All right, Notre Dame. We're going to see some more squeakers.
Yeah.
There it is. Why is it all grayed out? Because Brian Kelly
vacated,
yeah, they negated the wins. Yeah, vacated. Okay. Navy by 40 Purdue. Okay.
Yeah.
Purdue put up a couple big fights there against Ohio State and Notre Dame. The Michigan State game, I remember that game. So they dominated that game on defense.
That was the bridge year
Michigan game.
between Cousins and Connor Cook. So their offense wasn't great. It was all Le'Veon Bell, and then Notre Dame's defensive line was great, so they stopped Le'Veon Bell and their whole offense.
2012 Miami. Was that a typical 7-6 Miami team?
I think so. I'm not totally sure.
Again, Stanford was really good.
Yeah.
BYU, I don't remember. BYU 8-5. BYU 8-5. Beat San Diego State in a bowl game. Are all these results still on the screen? Okay. Oklahoma.
Yeah, that was a memorable game.
Okay. Well, yeah, I do remember that now that I see the score. And of course, they lost to Johnny Manziel in the Cotton Bowl, but
still a good team.
They had a nice team.
Yeah. The Pitt, oh my gosh, the Pitt game almost gave me a heart attack. Oh, the Pitt game.
Pitt. All right. Well, I'm going to guess Pitt went 7-6 that year.
Yeah, I think they
That's
did.
pretty much what they did all the time then.
That was like almost a classic letdown game. Like similar. Well, yeah. I mean, that could have been similar to the '93 BC game. Although that BC team was still better than that Pitt team.
Pitt went 6-7 and lost to Ole Miss in the Birmingham Bowl. Boston College 21-6, Wake 38-zip, USC 22-13. That USC team, that was a Lane Kiffin team, right?
Yeah. I remember their quarterback Whittick, who was Barkley's backup. Barkley was hurt again. He was hurt in 2010 too. And then they said, we were going to be Notre Dame, and they always play us tough at the Coliseum, even when they suck.
USC went 7-6. That was a USC team that was ranked number 1 in one of the polls to start the season, and they ended up losing to Georgia Tech in the Sun Bowl. Yeah, I remember that. And then, of course, the BCS championship game.
Yeah, I feel like Kelly could have prepared the team better, but I don't think. I mean, it could have been like a 14-point game if he prepared the team better, maybe.
Yeah, I would say that Notre Dame played a better schedule. It's strange that they both played. Of course, this is before the ACC contract, that they both played Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue. And you would say Notre Dame definitely played better against Michigan State, although, well, they both played on the road. Okay. Yeah. And they both played relatively tight games against the other two.
Mm-hmm. I think it would have been a great game.
I think so, too. I'm going to say Ohio State would have won, but I'm biased, so I will admit it. Mm-hmm. But I would not have been surprised had Notre Dame won the game.
How good was the Ohio State offensive line that year?
How good was the offensive line? Well, they had Carlos Hyde at running back. Their offensive line was actually some of those. They had 3 or 4 of those guys played on their national championship team 2 years later. Yeah. So they had a decent offensive line. It was more that Braxton Miller still wasn't. He was a really good player. He won the Big Ten MVP, but just not, a polished quarterback was one issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I just don't know if Notre Dame could have scored, but I think it would have been a low-scoring game, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else you wanted to hit on?
No, that's pretty much it. I want to make an argument next show that I think I can make an argument that the '89 Notre Dame team played just as tough as a gauntlet as the 2011 LSU team. So that'll be a fun.
Oh, okay, we can do that.
Yeah, and both teams only had one loss at the end, so that'll be fun.
We can definitely do that.
Thanks again for your time, Mark, and this is a lot of fun.
Appreciate it, Will. Yeah.
There's some of these games I'm like, oh, I cannot believe I'm like that I forgot about. Like I forgot about that LSU Florida bowl game. I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean Louisville Florida bowl game. I'm like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
I couldn't believe that Louisville won that game.
Yeah, that one surprised me. And Florida, for all the grief that Will Muschamp takes, that team was really good, and they played a tough schedule.
Yeah, and then remembering all those Thursday night Big East games, even though the Big East was terrible, those games were still fun. So
yeah, they were fun
too. But yeah, thanks again for your time, Mark, and have a great rest of your night.
Sure, Will. We'll keep it going. Good to see you. Well, let's keep it moving. There we go. Here we go. We got Tim on the line. USC Tim, fight on.
Guys, it's been so long, Mark. I forgot what I was calling for. I was
Well, like
you got there.
Time. I guess I should go rapid fire, but if I went rapid fire, then
No. All those calls were great. I'm not saying that at all. But I mean, literally saying, I think I literally forgot what I was called for. But remember one thing about that TCU game against Utah, the 47-7. That was also at Rice Eccles, and that's one of the hardest places to play. Period.
Yeah.
And that a 47-7 win at Rice Eccles when you have a pretty solid Utah team. I mean, that's a pretty damn impressive win. Trust me, going into that place, even when they don't have strong teams, you're playing at altitude, you're playing at could be possibly cold weather at that time of year. I think it's a great win.
Oh, it's a great win.
I called really because of that 2008, because I brought this up so many times in the past. That 2008 team is historic defense. It's up there with, 2001 Miami and 2021 Georgia. Like literally, it's probably one of the generational defense. That's how good that defense was. And as much as I'm trying to bang the drum for Utah, and it's kind of hard to do because I just don't see any of those teams you had up there scoring points on that team. That team, just the linebackers alone on that team were insane. And the one hiccup they had, you have it right there. Yeah. The one hiccup they have is after, probably flying high after that was one of the greatest games of Coliseum I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
The dismantling of Ohio State. They were flying high, and they played a horrible first half, and they were reading their own press clippings, and they tried to dig themselves out and came up 7 points short. That was or 6 points short. That was painful to watch. But it's weird that loss was so early in the season, and they never brought them up above 5 the rest of the year. I mean, voting was absurd that year.
Yeah. So they were, number 5 going
unbelievable.
Into UCLA
one loss on the road early in the season, and look at those scores, Mark. It wasn't like they were squeaking out wins. If I told you that USC was going to beat Ohio State 35-3, Washington 56-0, Notre Dame 38-3, that wasn't a great Notre Dame team. But I'm just saying, going and beating these teams, they were dominating teams. They were number one.
Pretty much. I see that Arizona score 17-10 is about the only one that pops out.
I can't remember back then. I'll tell you what, that's clearly an anomaly. Was somebody hurt in that game? I mean, I've got no idea.
Let's see how good Arizona was that year. They went 8-5 and beat BYU in a bowl game. So they were decent.
Everyone has those years. I mean, Georgia struggled against some pretty mediocre competition last year as well.
Sure.
I wouldn't say they weren't the best team in the country. I mean, it just happens. That's the problem. And you look at that, you look at Georgia struggling last year. You look at USC losing to Oregon State on the road after a big emotional win. That's where you got to remember, I don't care how good your team is or how good your coach is. These are games played by 18 to 23-year-old guys.
Yeah.
That, that's the mastery of being a great coach. That's how Nick Saban did what he's done for the past, the run he's had at Alabama. It shows you that you have to keep your guys tight because they're going to slip up to inferior competition. And that's why what Nick Saban came out and said that whole thing earlier, this a couple weeks ago about how they would have been the favorites in a game, the playoffs. So why weren't they in the playoffs, et cetera? It's because we see year in, year out, you see great teams get upset by teams that aren't as good. And that's why we have the playoffs. You play you at least win your division, and hopefully your conference, and then get into the playoffs. So there's not much of an argument. But I just wanted to make the point that 2008, the fact that USC did not play in 2008 with that defense, and the thing that's so hard to figure out is, even in the chat today, I heard, well, they don't play defense in the Pac-12, and I used to say that, but even back in the 2000s, which was completely wrong. Some of those Stanford defenses, definitely the USC defenses, were really, really good. And Cal, some of those Cal defenses were insane. And to make blanket statements like that, well, they don't play defense, and then USC has a historic defense, and they're left out of the game.
Okay. Well, there's a couple things working against them in this, and for right or wrong, or not their fault, but one would be, what did Oklahoma and Florida accomplish that USC did not? They played conference championship games. So
USC can't control that. That has nothing to do with it.
I know, but that's still part of the process.
Who did they
evaluation.
play? And who did they play?
Who did they play in the conference championship games? Florida played Alabama, who was undefeated and number one in the country.
Who lost to Utah. So they
that's after the fact. We're talking about a decision that was made prior to postseason play.
Yeah. Well, again, a 7-point loss.
Yeah, I understand you being upset about this, and you have every right to be. And I just awarded USC a national championship.
Well, I appreciate it, Mark, but
I know no one cares what I think, but hey, that's why I got a YouTube channel. I can just say whatever I want and award whatever I want. But yes. So number one, that again, they didn't play a conference championship game. So they're sitting on the sideline while those other two teams are impressing against top competition. And then the other one, what else did I have in my mind that they did not get accomplished there?
Who did Oklahoma beat?
Who did Oklahoma beat? I believe Missouri. And also you got to realize that Oklahoma, so the SEC's at this point considered the best conference. So Florida's going to be there as a one-loss conference champion over anybody. And the other thing is that Oklahoma had that round robin with Texas Tech and Texas, and they both went 11-1. So when you got 3 11-1 teams, those are two really impressive wins. While, and again, I'm on your side through most of this. I'm just explaining to you what might have been going through the voters' minds.
I got a big point for you.
Let's go up to hang on just a second. Let's go up to the Pac-12 standings. So
that's going to be my point. USC played everyone in their conference. USC played everybody in their conference.
They played everyone? Did they beat that Oregon team?
You see.
I don't remember that score.
Go back to the schedule.
They did. They beat them 44-10.
Well, I mean, they played 9 conference games, and back then there were 10 teams. And so that means USC played everyone in their conference and lost 1 game to Oregon State on the road by 6 points.
Okay.
So they beat the second best team in their conference. Right. Okay. So that would, therefore, they pretty much won their, if you want to call it. Now, back then, did the SEC play 9? No, it's 8, just 8 conference games.
They played 8, but then they played a conference championship game.
Okay. So then a 9th game, really.
Yeah.
So USC played 9 conference games, and they played 9 conference games.
Yes.
And then Oklahoma, did they play 9 conference games?
No.
All right, so one of the 3 teams played 9 conference games and beat, because I don't think Oregon State was the second best in the conference. They're tied for second. My bad. They're tied for second best. So USC had the best record in conference, won the conference, played 9 games, just like the 2 teams you just named.
Absolutely. But I'm guessing that if you were an Oklahoma or Florida fan, that you would be making those same statements. I'm trying to play mediator and give you the argument for the other teams.
No, I get you. And if this defense wasn't as good, see, what's the best metric for defense, would you say, Mark, in college football?
One
What
of
do
the
you
best
look at?
is yards per play.
Yards per play. You want to guess what USC's yards per play in that game, that season were?
4.2.
3.5.
Yeah, that's
when
dumb.
I tell you this was a historic defense, I'm not just throwing that because I'm a USC fan. 3.5. That's I don't know what that's better than 2021 Georgia, and I don't know. I actually don't know if it's better than 2001 Miami.
I'm going to guess that it was, but I don't know. I know Georgia was around 4 flat.
And the rush defense, I don't remember what it was. It was disgusting. It was like 70 yards a game or 77 yards a game.
Yeah.
I mean,
I did a comparison of all the. Well, I didn't do a comparison. I'm sorry, of this team. Go ahead.
Well, I just don't think people when I say that 2008 defense was really good. I'm not saying like, oh yeah, hey, they were pretty good. They had some good games. No, it was insane the way that they were able to just take over games. And if you look at their scores in the games, it represents just how stifling they were. And the way they handled Penn State, and Penn State lost to Iowa, right? It was their only loss of the year.
Yes.
Otherwise, they would have been the BCS game.
Yeah.
They lost a close one at Kinnick. And like you said, I was at that Rose Bowl. My brother and I were hammered by halftime because we were drinking so much because that game was just done. At halftime, we went there, we just started celebrating, and Carroll really called the dogs off in the fourth quarter. They ended up scoring like 17 garbage points, but it would have been a heck of a lot more if USC, if he had left all the starters in and really laid one on. I think he had too much respect for Joe Pa to do that. And quite frankly, Pete Carroll rarely did that to anyone unless they were the lovely Bruins. But that Rose Bowl to me was an exclamation point on anything that he wants to say. Well, were they really? We had Utah and these others. What USC did to that really good Penn State team was all the validation I need for that team, along with that historic defense. I don't think I don't think Tim Tebow's scoring a lot of points against that defense. I don't. That Tim Tebow's type, that offense they had at Florida is exactly the offense that this defense loved. The only way you could really score on this team is if you had really good passing attack. I mean, elite, like Aaron Rodgers level elite passing attack. Other than that, it was a hard time moving the ball against this USC team. And that is not what that Florida team. That was a tough, let's run at you. But I tell you that you had, Mayava and Cushing and Matthews and I'm blanking on it, Ray Malaluga. Those were our linebackers. All those guys are 6'3", 6'4", 230, 240 pounds. Timmy Tebow wasn't getting any yards in that game on the ground. So I'm it's a shame. I'll call back later because really the biggest travesty of all time really is that 2003 game and the fact that USC was left out of that. And the fact, to add a little more onto this, can you imagine if there was a 14 playoff during the Pete Carroll years? Because as good as a coach he was in season, you give Carroll 3 or 4 weeks to get ready for your team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his bowl record shows it. Everyone points to, well, you lost to Texas. Texas and Kansas State are the only two teams out of conference in 9 years that Pete Carroll lost to. And that Texas game, there's always injuries, of course, but if you look at the secondary for USC going into that game, that was one of our best offenses of all time. But it was probably nowhere near the top 5 defenses we've ever had. Everyone talked about 2005 being the greatest USC team ever. It wasn't. It was really good, but there are too many injuries. Golden Playbook, the teams I'm talking about, destroyed your Irish teams. Like every time they played, except for 2005. So I don't know if you think they suck that bad. You might want to rethink that one.
Who's saying that?
Golden Playbook.
Oh,
he's a domer.
Goodness.
Yeah, those teams sucked, buddy.
We are talking about all-time great teams. That run of USC teams from 2002, and I don't even think they really had a role in 2002. That was obviously Carroll's second team, but they still beat a good Iowa team by 3 touchdowns easily in the Orange Bowl, and had the Heisman Trophy winner, of course. And then they got rolling the next season. And from 03 through 08, my goodness, they were so talented.
I just made the mistake of looking at the chat. I listen. I know Big Ten fans out there. I know you angry because you guys never beat Pete Carroll. I know you guys are mad. And Irish fans, I know you're mad too because, well, except for that first year in 2001 when he absolutely had nobody on that team, you guys couldn't even get close except for that 2005 game. And even that, the funniest story about that 2005 Mark. I talked to a player on the team. Yeah. They went to the walkthrough the day before. And of course, we all know the grass was like this long, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Notre Dame comes out to, they come out and USC comes out in their speed cleats. And Notre Dame comes out in these screw-in cleats this deep, this big. Because they knew that, and also they'd watered the field. It was bone dry and it didn't rain. They watered the field before. These guys, these Irish, along with their green jerseys, they pulled every little stunt they could to try to slow USC down, and they still lost.
It was a great game, though. They lost, but
did you ever see that Zibikowski punt? You know what I'm talking about? When he runs back for a touchdown?
Yes, I have.
They were not one. There were 2 blatant clips on that return. And the thing is on a kick return is when there is a block in the back, it's right in front of everybody. Like you cannot miss that call. And there wasn't one, but there were 2 that sprung that kick, which kept them in the game. It was a good game. It was a great game. Brady Quinn was just throwing dimes in that game. It just playing out of his mind. But I thought it was funny when I heard a story that not only we all knew they grew the grass really long. But this tragedy is Desmond Reed, a backup running back for SC, who was really good, blew his knee out on a kick return that got caught up in that turf, non-contact, and tore his ACL because they decided they wanted to do some gamesmanship and possibly ruin a kid's career. So, but anyway, yeah, 2008 USC. Georgia fan, Miami fan, come at me all you want, but I got the numbers to prove it. And the NFL, there's like 24 guys on that team that went on and played in the NFL. 24. So it was a pretty good team, and it's a shame they didn't get a chance to play Florida and see who was the best team in the country.
Yeah, that would have been phenomenal.
And LSU, you're next. That's in the next segment. That's 2003. We'll get there later.
Yeah, and again, just to reiterate what you had to say, that Penn State team was not a ultra super talented team, but they were a really good team. They were definitely a top 5 team in the country in that range, and that game was not 38-24 close. That looks good for Penn State, that they hung in there on the scoreboard, but blown out 31-7, third quarter, forget it, done, could have scored 50. And that Ohio State team, that was no vintage Ohio State team, but they still went to the Fiesta Bowl and took Texas down to the last 15 seconds of that game and would have won the game, I think, if Beanie Wells would have played the whole game. He had 130 yards rushing at halftime. So not a great Ohio State team, but a really good one, a top 8 team in the country, and USC just blew their doors off, destroyed.
Mark, so you know about this probably more than some of your Ohio State brethren. What is with the Buckeyes coming to the Coliseum?
It's not good. It's not pretty.
I just recently saw it going back farther, the trouble that they've had in the Coliseum. It's scoring points. Like I think there were like 3 or 4 games in a row where you guys scored like 3 points going back at the Coliseum.
Well, I'm trying to think what other games, because it would be they both played in 89 and 90. And so the 89 game was at the Coliseum, and that was 42-3. They got crushed in that game.
And there was one more, I think, in the late 70s or in the 70s sometime, where it was Ohio State only scored 3 points. Now I don't think SC scored that many points, but it was just like they're having trouble scoring
in the regular season in the 70s.
Let me see. I saw it. Well, anyway, you got it. I could put the chat, but
USC, Ohio State. Yeah, they played back-to-back years in outside of postseason play, 89-90, and then they played in 08-09.
Okay.
and the other were all Rose Bowl games, besides, of course, the Cotton Bowl game they just played.
Okay. Well, so it was 2 then. Oh, it's only 2 then. But I don't know what's going on with them.
Well, that '08 Ohio State team, again, was not a vintage Ohio State team by any stretch, but they were really good, and the team was loaded with NFL players, plenty of NFL players on that Ohio State team. And they did tie Penn State for the Big Ten championship and did take a Texas team that finished, like number 3 or 4 in the polls, 12-1, down the last 15 seconds of the game in the Fiesta Bowl. But that '89 team, that's just when John Cooper started. That was the second year, and they were okay. They got better that season, but they finished 8-4. They were not a great team, but they were okay.
So this is why you didn't know, because you're not old enough. You have to go back to 1964 and 63. They also had a home and home.
Okay.
In Columbus, the Buckeyes beat the Trojans 17-0. But the year prior, in 63, Ohio State again only scored 3 points, and USC scored 32 at the Coliseum.
Mm.
So if you total up those 3 games, the Coliseum, over decades, of course, looks like just over decades and decades. And then another one in 60 and 59. In 59, Ohio State scored 0 points. They lost 0-17. So I'm telling you, Buckeyes, you guys got to fight at the end. You got to find the end zones in the Coliseum coming up.
What was the game in 1960 in Columbus?
60 was 20-0 Buckeyes.
Okay.
So it looks like the Trojans can't find the end zone years ago.
Yes, a long time ago.
But back then, USC couldn't find the end zone in Columbus, and the Buckeyes couldn't find the end zone at the Coliseum. But I'm excited. We'll see you guys in 2025. That's going to be amazing. My second trip to the shoe. I can't wait.
Yeah, it should be something else when those two.
All right, so all you guys out there, all you SEC fans that say they don't play defense out in the Pac-12, I just named for you in 2008, probably one of the best, if not, in my opinion, humble opinion. I think it's 2001. I think 2001 Miami with their players, and the jury's still out in the NFL with some pretty amazing dogs.
Yeah.
The USC guys played a long time in the NFL, but none of them are Hall of Famers. But you have Hall of Famers from the Miami team, and we'll see what the Georgia team. But as far as in college, what that 2008 USC football defense did, just historic, and people need to realize that.
All right, Tim.
Mark.
Appreciate it.
Talk to you later.
And folks, keep in mind, Tim and Rick and I get together every Sunday night on our USC channel for Trojan Conquest Live. It's a good time. Check out the latest in USC recruiting, breakdowns on everything USC leading into the 23 season. Rick and Tim leading us for Trojan Conquest Live. That's Sunday night at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. All right. We've got a stack of phone calls coming in, so let's get to them. We got Golden Playbook joining us tonight.
How's it going?
I am doing just fine. How are you?
Doing good.
Hello. Yes. What's on your mind?
You hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to say, I think that 2012 season was by far Brian Kelly's best season.
Okay.
I think 2020, 2018 was pretty good, but I think 2012, obviously we got stomped by Alabama. Alabama was dominating, college football for the last 12 years. I would say.
When you say that was Brian Kelly's best team, do you mean that was his best coaching job or that was his best team?
I would say that was his best coaching job, probably.
Yeah.
And one more thing, remember when we were kind of debating about Brian Kelly? Is he a good coach? Is he a bad coach?
You and I weren't debating that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I understood what you were saying about like Lincoln Riley and all that. Um, Lincoln Riley isn't as good as Brian Kelly is. Like Brian Kelly is definitely like the better coach.
Well, you're
Like
arguing possibly with the wrong person, number one. Number two, I don't think you cannot say that definitively, that Brian Kelly is a better coach than Lincoln Riley. How can you say that? You can have that opinion. I'm not saying that you can't have that opinion, that there's not a basis for that opinion, but you can't say that. That's not like saying Nick Saban is a better coach than Lane Kiffin. Well, yes, obviously, nobody's going to debate that. It's not debatable. But Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley, we could sit here all night and have a debate, and we would both have good points as to debating who's better. I've got them within 2 or 3 spots on my coaches' rankings. So that means that it's a toss-up in my eyes.
yeah, I'm just saying like Lincoln Riley hasn't really had great defenses,
Okay. Do you want me
and
to take on? I will take on the Lincoln Riley debate if you want me to take on, even though I'm not really convicted that Lincoln Riley's a better coach than Brian Kelly. I will certainly take on that devil's advocate spot and argue that Lincoln Riley is.
so you think he is then? You think he's like a better
Have you
like
listened to what I've said over the last 90 seconds?
well
Apparently
because
not.
the last time you said that Brian Kelly you had Brian Kelly in your top 10.
Yes, absolutely. I've got them both
And
in my top 10.
hmm. um what I'm basically saying is that yeah, they're both I don't even really want to compare the two, but I was just um Brian
You're a Notre
Kelly
Dame
did
fan
have
and you
good
believe Brian Kelly's a better coach than Lincoln Riley. I don't think that's a outrageous opinion by any stretch,
yeah
but it certainly can be debated that Lincoln Riley's a better coach than Brian Kelly as well.
yeah. I I just think that Brian Kelly had like better like defenses, you know?
Well, you're right. He has had better defenses, and Lincoln Riley's had better offenses.
Yeah. But
Um,
yeah,
our our guy Tim made a good point the other night in that it would be good to see Brian Kelly develop a quarterback. He may have the best quarterback playing for him that he's ever had, and he had a good season last year. It'd be interesting to see if Jaden Daniels can be a better quarterback this year.
right. Yeah, it's gonna be pretty interesting.
Plus, it's
Um
obviously his job to go sign a really good quarterback as well.
yeah. So what do you think what's your overall thoughts about um Tommy Reese and Tyler Butner at Alabama? Like what do you think about that hire? Do you think it's a bad hire? Do you think it's good on Nick Saban's part, or
Well, at this point, I'll call it curious, and this is the reason why. If you look at Tommy Reese's offensive production at Notre Dame, it's not that impressive. Notre Dame never ranked that high in offensive uh, statistics, points, passing, rushing. Obviously, they've had good rushing offenses. I shouldn't take that away from them. It's not like he's done an awful job, but they just have not had prolific offenses at Notre Dame. However, he has been somewhat limited at quarterback with decent quarterbacks, good quarterbacks. Ian Book, in my estimation, would be the best quarterback he had to work with. But Ian Book was not a great quarterback. He was not like a Trevor Lawrence or a CJ Stroud or a Justin Fields or somebody of that caliber to work with. He had great offensive lines, and really good running backs, and really good big body, obviously great tight ends. and big body wide receivers that moved on to the NFL that were not necessarily speed guys that stretched the defense. So he molded the offense to those strengths.
Yeah, I felt like he's just he wasn't good at developing quarterbacks. Like our offense was, it wasn't even in the top 25 when he was the coordinator. I think it was like I believe it was number 42.
Yeah, so
Last year.
that's my knock on Tommy Rees. I did give him a few disclaimers that Brian Kelly may not have assigned the kind of quarterback that would allow him to open up the offense and do some more creative things and stretch the field. But I ultimately trust Nick Saban. So if Nick Saban tabbed Tommy Rees as the guy that he wanted running his offense, then I think that speaks to Tommy Rees being maybe better than we all think. And it also speaks to what Nick Saban wants to get back to, and that's a more conservative offense.
Yeah. I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see how like Tyler Butner does, especially in the SEC. His performance in the spring game was pretty bad to say the least, but he may do better than we really think. You know, I don't know. Maybe he'll shock everyone there, but I thought it was kind of questionable, like that he would, because I think Tyler Butner is actually starting there.
Well, we don't know yet who's going to be the starter between he and Jalen Milroe. I think it's too close to call. I think that Tyler Buckner is a better thrower. I think even though Tyler Buckner's got great wheels and he's a really elusive quarterback, that Jalen Milroe is pretty special in that area. So Buckner's the better passer. Milroe's the slightly better runner. And we will see. Definitely Nick Saban was not pleased with Jalen Milroe's progress and wanted to bring in some competition for him.
Yeah. And I got another question for you.
Sure.
I'm just very, very curious. So are you a fan of Ohio State?
Yes.
That's like your favorite team then?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
I used to like it when nobody knew. That made it more fun because people would guess all the time, but it's out there. So there you go. I do my best to keep that under wraps. I don't do my best. I shouldn't say to keep it under wraps. I tell people, but in terms of my analysis, I try to push that to the side the best I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to some like Michigan fans in the comments about the Ohio State thing, you know, and I was basically saying that Ohio State basically the last 20 years has dominated the series, you know. And
Sure, they have. Now that's not debatable.
yeah. But they debate me, you know, and trash talk me, which is fine. But I always preferred OSU anyways, you know, because Michigan's my rival.
Yeah.
And I always want you guys to beat them, but yeah, I think Ohio State they produce talent just like Alabama. They compete with Alabama and Georgia. So they're definitely, I don't think Michigan's got talent, but they're not like on the level of like Ohio State the last like 20 years.
No.
So I definitely think they play, you know, with SEC. What they play Alabama, the Georgia is a lot better than Michigan would, you know, because they had 5 stars. Ohio State is basically like, to me, they're like the same as Alabama. Like they're able to compete with them. And every time you see Michigan play Alabama or Georgia, they always get like stomped for whatever reason.
Well, until the results prove otherwise, you're on the mark there.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Well, is there anything else you wanted to hit on?
I think that's it.
All right. Golden Playbook, we appreciate you stopping by. Call us anytime.
Alrighty.
All right. We'll keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. Before we take this next call from Salvador, let's hit these super chats. So we've got right hand lead. Great show, Mark. In 2007, I often think, what if? Okay, the bowl tie-ins ruined a USC Georgia game. Wow, that would have been crazy. That could have determined an AP split national title. Yes, Georgia plays Hawaii, USC plays Illinois. Both of those games were just complete wrecks. Instead, we got USC, Illinois. Yeah, Georgia, Hawaii. Yes, just I love the bowl tie-ins in regards to tradition. I want to see a Pac-10 or 12 team taking on a Big Ten team in the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl to be reserved for the SEC, and the Orange Bowl, well, back in the day was reserved for the Big 8, and then the Big 12, and then the ACC's got the bowl tie-in to the Orange Bowl. That always made sense. The Big 12 or the Big 8 traveling for a bowl game in Miami to be their host game. That was kind of strange when you had Nebraska and Oklahoma hosting the Orange Bowl against Miami and Florida State. But that's the way it was. And of course, the Cotton Bowl with the old Southwest Conference, that made total sense. Dallas. So I love those traditional bowl tie-ins with the regional flavor. However, yes, this is what it created right here was Ohio State goes off to the BCS championship game. And then there's this tie for second place in the Big Ten, and Illinois is really not that good. They're 9-3, but they lost a couple games in the Big Ten. They really, again, not that good. They did beat Ohio State, and they get trounced by USC in the Rose Bowl, and Georgia just annihilates Hawaii. Yeah, just not a good look, and we could have just seen better games. Jason tells us that Chris Foote says Colorado State will win the Natty. I'm surprised, Jason, that Chris has not said that Colorado State already has won national championships, but thank you for the contribution there. We've got Nick coming back. Yes, GF means girlfriend, Mark. Yes, I should know that. I do know that, but wasn't necessarily clicking at the time of trying to read through your many acronyms. The Bucknut Brain folks. Yes. Nick sneaking in $2 super chat to insult me. That's fine. Nick will probably never call the show because he doesn't want to be upstaged by a Bucknut Brain.